And a happy Wednesday to you. I'm Dino.
And I am Larry, and this is the ABCs of Faith,
A show that helps you know so you can grow, brought to you by First Presbyterian Church of Bradenton. Well, happy Wednesday to you, Larry. It's another week here at the ABCs of Faith.
It is another week, and the letter J.
You know, it's interesting. I think back, the J word, meaning Jesus, and we're not going to cover that really explicitly tonight, has actually been kind of an epithet almost. Like, don't say the J word, kind of an anti-religious sentiment or something. So I thought that was interesting to bring up.
And even more interesting because there's so many J words. Somebody even commented on our last episode that we should make the J word 2 episodes because there are so many J words.
We could make it probably 40 episodes. We could actually do a whole season of the J's of faith.
But we won't do that. We will
won't.
start with my son's name
Is James.
Yeah, and it is one of my favorite books of the Bible. The book of James is all the way at the end of the New Testament. Well, not all the way at the end.
Not all the way at
There's
the
a few tiny letters in the book of Revelation. But
Right.
other than that, James is near the end, and one of my, as I've mentioned, favorite books. Probably next to the book of Ecclesiastes. I really like it a
All right.
lot.
Cool.
So most likely, very probably written by Jesus' half-brother, James, although there is some scholarly debate because there are other Jameses that existed, James, son of Zebedee, and multiple Jameses in the New Testament. Could have been written by somebody else, could have also been polished up after James wrote it by somebody else because the argument is the Greek is a little too polished for it to have been James, half-brother of Jesus. But
regardless, it's
Right.
still an amazing book with amazing things to teach us.
absolutely incredible. So if it was written by James, it was probably written around 60 to 69 AD.
Okay, which is 30, 40 years after
30
Jesus
years
leaves. Yeah.
after Jesus, but before a lot of Paul's writing, which makes it pretty spectacular. It was written to Jewish Christians. So even though a lot of Paul's writing was very Gentile-based and shotgunning, trying to hit everybody, you can really tell when you're reading this, he's talking to Jewish Christians and Christians that are really persecuted because of the times that they lived in. So there's a lot about faith and prayer and trials and really good stuff in the book of James.
I mean, it kicks off with the whole overcoming of obstacles and how that builds us in our faith. So, James 1 is one of my favorite, chapters of all of Scripture.
Yep, love the book of James. Highly recommend you read it tonight after this episode.
Do it. And that moves us on to our next word, which is also a book of the Bible, but I'm not going to talk about the book of the Bible called Judges. I'm just going to talk about who the judges were. So the judges of Israel come at a very unique time in the history of Israel. And this is after Moses, and then Joshua as his successor is in leadership. And it's very clear who the leader of the people of God is. But they're all kind of broken up loosely into these 12 tribes. And after Joshua's gone, they have to figure out what to do. Israel, they want a king.
They really want
They really want it. They beg God, give us a king. Everyone else has a king. We want a king. But God says, you know what? This is not the right path for you. What I'm going to do is put people of strong wisdom and strong leadership in as judges, and they will be the ones that you look up to lead. So some of the most famous judges we have are like Gideon, Samson, Deborah, who's one of the first female leaders of God's people and just a fascinating Bible character altogether. So the judges lead the people of Israel through this period of time before the period of kings, which inevitably comes with King Saul.
They got their way, the people of Israel.
They sure did, and for better or worse, they got their way.
Mostly for worse, if you read the Old Testament.
That's absolutely right.
I think in the back of God's mind, he's like, I am the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and you don't need this.
And I told you so.
And now it's time for a younger perspective.
Judging is whenever we make a judgment about someone, which God tells us not to do. And it also means that we normally have an opinion about someone, and we can be kind of mean with that. God tells us to not judge others. He's the only judge that really matters to us.
So for our people and places this episode, we are starting with the place, which is Jericho. And I'm going to take Jericho. Jericho is a very ancient city that was once destroyed. So if you read like Joshua chapter 3, you were just talking about Joshua, right? Joshua chapter 6, I believe, is where you get this fantastic story of this battle at Jericho. The time frame that happened was a long, long time ago. At one point, somebody thought they found the ruins of the walls of Jericho.
Interesting.
They carbon dated those. Turns out that was probably not the right spot that they were looking. But Jericho is still, it's in Israel, kind of West Bank area, still inhabited, making it one of the oldest continually inhabited cities on the planet. And because it's a little below sea level, it's also one of the lowest elevation-wise.
I did not know that.
Very fascinating.
The
So,
only thing I know about Jericho
yeah.
is that Joshua fought the battle of Jericho,
but it's not a singing show.
and the walls came tumbling
Tumbling
down. All right. Now, for our J person, there were a lot of J's to choose from, as
Oh,
we've
my
already
goodness.
pointed out. I mean, Jesus, John, John the Baptist, the other John, probably a few other Johns, Jonah, Jairus, Jacob, James, and so on. So obviously we picked Jehoshaphat,
Of course.
mostly because I just love the name. Jehoshaphat is an Old Testament guy. His name means Yahweh has judged, and he ended up being one of those kings of Israel after the period of Judges. And Israel, Judah, they break up, and it's really messy. And Jehoshaphat's dad, Asa, becomes one of the good kings of the nation of Judah. And he is somebody who really restores, and his son Jehoshaphat follows in his dad's footsteps for the most part, maintaining the peace. And Jehoshaphat really works to solidify the nation, the military, fortify its borders, and his reign is recorded in the scriptures as being a really good reign. One of the fun facts I have about Jehoshaphat is that in the 19th century there was this movement to come up with like fake bad words, and the phrase "jump in Jehoshaphat" became one of those minced oaths, those pseudo swear words that replace profanities. So that's probably where most people know the name. I remember Yosemite Sam saying, "Jump in Jehoshaphat."
I do remember that.
Yeah, so there you go.
And now it's time for a deeper perspective.
So you saw the younger perspective on judging, the word judging. And for a deeper perspective, I just thought I would point out the fact that sometimes people split hairs on just this word in and of itself
Don't they?
because of the nature of what it actually means to judge another human being or another person or another entity or business or whatever. And it's so easy to find flaws.
Yeah, there's this Bible verse in Matthew about, don't look at a speck in someone else's eye when you've got a plank in your own eye. I think we can become so others focused in our judging that we lack being God focused, and that's one of the big issues.
Absolutely. The idea that it's not our place to judge is the side that some people camp out on. But then I think it's in John chapter 7, it actually says, judge rightly. So at some point, maybe we are supposed to judge. My answer to that is, if we are judging our lives first and we're using a biblical standard, even when we're looking at other people, it's going to make us a lot more loving and
absolutely.
a lot more gospel-centric.
It's a great point.
Yeah, Proverbs 31:9 also says, judge righteously and defend the rights of the poor and needy. So there again, if you're doing it right, there's not a problem. But also with judging is there's something that we're looking forward to.
Yes.
Rightly so, as Christians, we're looking forward to a day when God actually looks at humanity and looks at us individually, and we are judged. We face what a lot of people refer to as a final judgment.
Yeah.
And at that point, our name is either literally or figuratively written in a book. We don't know what that judgment's going to look like or feel like.
I think this is a great final word. But before we get there, Larry, why don't you tell everybody how they can send you words for our show?
Well, you can do what somebody did last week and actually comment on this week's video. We will see that.
Yes.
You can email those to larry@bradenton.church, or you can stop Dino or myself at church one Sunday morning. When you come to church, he says, stop me.
Yes,
And just tell me
definitely.
what words that you want to hear coming up on the show.
That's right. And if you come up with a C word, it's going to be a while, but we'll take those into consideration as well.
Absolutely.
And so our last word is Jehovah.
Big word.
Big word, one of the names of God. And God reveals his name, Yahweh, I am that I am, to Moses. But this becomes kind of a tricky thing for God's people because they put themselves in a position where they don't want to say or write God's name. It's too holy, it's too sacred to be condensed down into a phrase or a word we could utter or write down. And so they almost thought of it like it would be idolatry. So they had to come up with ways to describe God that weren't saying Yahweh, I am that I am. So they came up with other ways to call God by name. And one of those in Hebrew was Yahovah, which basically in Hebrew, you don't have a lot of vowels and you have to figure some of that out. They would add in random vowels so that it's not exactly the name of God. The Yahovah word was Latinized to Jehovah. So Yahweh and Jehovah are interchangeable when we speak in English and in a lot of Bible translations. They are simply translated as Lord. You'll see them capitalized, Lord, all in caps. But often the word Jehovah gets attention because it's attached to another word that kind of peels back another layer, another name of God. Mm-hmm. So to give context, Jehovah Shalom means the Lord is peace. Jehovah Rapha means the Lord our healer. In one of the most famous instances, we have Abraham, who we've talked about, with his son Isaac. He's going to go sacrifice his son, and then the Lord stops him and says, no, don't do that. I provided a sacrifice for you. He finds a ram in the thickets, and then God gives him that sacrifice, and Abraham says, Jehovah Jireh, which means the Lord provides. So there's a lot of different ways that we can address God and talk about God. I think the big point is Jehovah is a way that we revere God with our speech. It's not so flippant. It's a really powerful word that goes across the ages and goes across cultures. So
very good.
Yeah, well, that's our show for today, and we thank you so much for joining us on the J Words. We'll see you back here next time with the letter K.
K, absolutely.
K, Larry?
K.
We'll see you soon.